Hey everyone, welcome to the Psychedelic Integration Podcast with Mystical Heart Collective. I'm Sinclair.
And I'm John.
And we help heart-centered spiritual seekers and psychedelic explorers heal with psychedelics through holistic preparation, navigation, integration, retreats, and the power of community. Today we're going to be talking about releasing the fear vibration and discuss how endless news, social media, and advertising create scarcity, illness, and fear, and how psychedelics offer us a way out of the matrix.
Okay, so that's kind of a mouthful, right? What does that mean, and why is it important to us?
I sound like a newscaster.
So, what that is we're talking about the news, the social media, the political activism, the advertising, how all of these systems try to pull us into a certain vibration. A vibration of fear, a vibration of anger, a vibration of, cultivating a bleak attitude and outlook on the whole world, and how that really disempowers us. And why it's important to us is we don't want to live in a world that is bleak, that is full of anger, that's full of fear, that is full of injustice. We want to live in a joyous, peaceful world, and we want to talk about how unplugging from some of those things can help us create more of what we want to see instead.
So why and how does this kind of look in our lives? It sort of, for me, or the way that I understand it, is kind of started back in when I was in college, right out of college. In 2001, right around 9/11, I remember this shift from, having news be on in the evenings and kind of there was CNN and maybe a couple other ones. They really were not on 24 hours a day. And then it was 9/11 happened, and then bam, we've got these news tickers that are not only are you watching the news, but there's stuff running at the bottom, there's stuff running at the top. You've got commentators on each side. And I remember when 9/11 was happening and that kind of started, that was a big change. And you're just kind of wow. And then we were just all of a sudden always watching the news. The news was on at work. The news was on in restaurants. The news was just on all the time. And we got really kind of used to it. And because we had this vibration of, we had been attacked, we felt victimized and traumatized as a country. And it was sort of this perfect storm of this terrible thing happened and wanting to know and understand and be supportive because it was one of the worst things that's ever happened in our country. And then that being used to keep us in that feeling of fear of, the war on terrorism is a great example of we're not really sure what you should be afraid of, but you should be afraid all the time. And it's shifted from okay, war on terrorism, war on drugs. Now we have a war on COVID and the political strife that goes on between, the progressives and the conservatives. It keeps us in this divisive state of mind that honestly leads us to spending money in certain ways, voting in certain ways, aligning our spending habits in the ways that we've attached our identities and the groups that we've attached our identities to.
When people are afraid, we're very easy to manipulate. We're very easy to control. When we're angry, when we're worked up in any sort of emotional state, we're very easy to direct, right? So, if we're terrified and we're looking to anyone for help, oh my God, I'm so afraid, and someone says, well, go that way. That'll help. You're going to go that way. And we're being manipulated in this. And the beginning of this cycle is creating the scarcity. It's creating the fear. It's creating the alarm. It's creating this vibration within ourselves. And the problem with that is that what we're being sold as we need to be afraid of, we need to be alarmed at, we need to be angry about are all very real things, right? We don't want to see the world suffering a health crisis with a pandemic. We don't want to see injustice in the world. We want to see our politicians looking out for us and not doing nefarious self-interest bullshit. And we want to contribute to putting an end to all that stuff. But what ends up happening is we are made to feel angry, we're made to feel afraid, we're made to feel alarmed about something, and then there's no solution offered. Then we're just left with this fear, this anxiety, this rage. And instead of working towards a solution, now we're just carrying around this vibration, and that's what we're expressing all over the place. So it really contributes to more of a problem. And on top of that, we are feeling afraid and angry and enraged and all these things, which is like really not pleasant. If you're walking around in a world full of people who are feeling that way, it's like, it is a pretty bleak world. So what we want to talk about today is how to pull out of that, why it's important, and what do we want to create instead.
I think they actually do provide a solution, and the solution is blame someone who doesn't believe the same things that you do. Blame someone who looks different than you, who has a different sexuality than you, who has a different religion than you. It's their fault that you don't have a job. It's their fault that your grandmother died of COVID. And it happens, and this is not going to be a popular thing that I'm saying, but whatever side you find yourself on is equally as toxic as the other side that you're against. And this was a big realization for me personally, really the last few years since I started working with plant medicine, of how ingrained my identity was in these political boxes, in these boxes of saying, okay, I'm progressive, I'm pro, I'm pro women's reproductive rights, I'm pro LGBTQIA, I'm like, I believe in trans rights, like all of these things. I'm like, yes, this is me. And people who don't believe this way are against me. They're, I spent a lot of my, younger adult life being an activist, being an in the streets protesting activist, and identifying myself by what I was not a part of. And well, I can't relate to these people because they, are oppressing me. And that way of living was frankly exhausting. It took so much energy to maintain that level of anger and wokeness all the time. And I have to be righteously outraged. And my ego really liked it because I was like, well, look at me. I'm so woke. I'm so progressive. Like, let me give myself a medal for, being out on the streets and putting my own body in harm's way to protest this thing. And what it was really doing was keeping me from looking at myself and from actually looking at my own life. I was deeply addicted to alcohol. I was not living a life that was aligned with my inner purpose or my inner light. And those identity politics enabled me to kind of stay asleep to my own responsibility for actually doing something about my own participation in the broken system.
And for me, that's really where psychedelics came into the mix. Psychedelics, well, first, they do this beautiful thing where they are asking us to question everything. Is that true? Is what we believe about ourselves true? Is what we believe about the world true? Is the way that we're being told to think about this, is that true? Is what they say is right and this is wrong, is that true? And they start to help us break down all these barriers of what we believe and start to question all of them. And along with that comes this great empowerment that we don't have to be consumers of culture. We don't have to just take what other people say and adopt it as our own beliefs and to just agree or disagree with it. They invite us to decide what we believe and create our own culture and create our own beliefs and create our own way of interacting with the world and create our own set of truths to live by. And that empowered place, if everyone in the world is living from this empowered place, then we're really creating what we want to see instead of those things, right? It's like, okay, so we all know that there's like a lot of pollution going on in the world, and like there's plastic in the ocean, and there's deforestation of the rainforest, and all these like things that aren't so great. And what most people do is they look at that and they're like, oh my God, this is horrible. And they take to social media or talking to their friends or whatever and say like, look at what they're doing in the rainforest. Look at how much plastic is in the ocean. Look at all this. While simultaneously all those things are happening, there are people planting trees. There are people cleaning up the oceans. There are people cleaning up and creating justice places where there's injustice. So why, if that's what we want to create, if that's what we'd rather see instead, why don't we talk about those things? Why don't we create more of that? Why don't we give that our energy instead of all the injustices that are going on?
Something that really started to resonate for me when I started working with plant medicine and facilitating, retreats with other people is, in most of human history, we've not had this global access of knowing everything happening all over the world simultaneously. And it's really only been, in the last 100 years or less where we've made these huge technological advances. We now have the internet where you can see some, in Arab countries where they had, I don't know if you remember the Arab Spring when people were protesting in the streets and there was this huge political uprising happening real time. You could watch people who were at these protests. It was amazing and fascinating and cool. And at the same time, it also is very heavy and painful to individually carry the weight of all of the injustice, all the isolation, all the division, all of the pain and suffering of the world that we really do not have the power to do anything about.
Well, we don't have the power to do anything about it systemically, right? So that's what the whole news cycle makes us feel like, is that, okay, look at this big thing. This thing is going on and this big injustice is happening and it's so much bigger than you. And you personally can't do shit about it. So just feel bad about it all the time. And what psychedelics ask us to do is okay, let's shine a flashlight on yourself. There's this systemic problem of injustice. Where are you being unjust in your life? And it might not be so extreme as the extremity of a dictator oppressing an entire country's worth of people. But there may be someone in our work or in our friend or family circle that maybe we aren't treating so well. And us taking a look at that, taking personal responsibility for something that we can do something about, this one relationship where we have a little bit of injustice. Okay, I'm going to fix that because that's something I can actually do something about it. If the whole world starts to take on that personal responsibility in for a bite-sized and manageable contribution to equality and justice, if everyone did that, there wouldn't be room for a dictator to oppress an entire country, right? So the medicines offer us a solution to these big problems by seeing what is our mirror of that in our own lives and what can we actually do about it, because our lives is where we can do something about all these things.
Yeah, I feel like it starts so early, this individualizing the greater suffering to the point that it's become, this cool physical identity of even things like emo, kind of like an emo goth look where it's I had this when I was a teenager. I'm I'm sad. And I would wear lots of dark eyeliner and be, I was look at me, I'm suffering, it's this thing that we learn when we're young. And we do feel that suffering. We do feel that pain. So much so that some of us have no way to cope with it. So we turn to addiction. We turn to self-harm. We develop eating disorders. We are a fucked up society in the U.S. because we are taking all of this in. We're consuming all of this news and all of this fear and all of this division and all of this hatred, and then we turn it on ourselves, and we don't have any healthy coping mechanisms. We don't know who we are outside of, these things out. It's we're programmed to stop having intuition, to stop listening to our bodies, to hate our bodies if they don't look a certain way, if they're not, the right, beautiful way to look. And we internalize all this self-hate and act out on ourselves. And then we wonder why everybody's on antidepressants and everyone is anxious and everyone's depressed.
There's one of the things to look out for, right? If at the end of this sequence of events where it's hey, look at this, now you should feel this way, please make feeling this way your identity, and we have something for you to buy. We have drugs for you to buy. We have clothes for you to buy. We have alcohol for you to buy. We have all the solutions to the problems that we've created. That's how you know it's bullshit. That's how you know it's not you, that it's someone else telling you that you should feel this way and that you should buy the solution to the problem that they've created. It's a scam.
It is a scam, and it's like a self-perpetuating scam, because if you decide, I don't want to identify with this anymore, I don't want to participate in this anymore, I don't want to be a part of the political, activist, news, social media circus anymore, then we sort of self-police, which is that group that you were sort of deciding, I'm not going to be a part of this anymore, is like, wow, how shameful, how gross, you're racist, you're sexist, you're obviously like, you know, anti this, or you're our enemy and we're going to cancel you. And it's a very, like, we are our own mind police. We're our own thought police. And we have this fear of, okay, well, if I don't continue to participate and like follow news organizations and stay informed all the time, then I'm privileged and unaware, and like
irresponsible.
I'm not acknowledging the suffering of others or marginalized groups. If I'm not plugged into the suffering, then I am not participating in the solution. And this idea that carrying more suffering in yourself is helping is wrong.
No, it's creating more suffering. So it's psychedelics offer this invitation into what do we want to create instead. Like I was saying before, they offer us this, like, start questioning things. So, okay, so do we believe that's true? Do we believe the way that we're told to act and think? Is that right? Do we agree with that? It creates all this questioning. And then the next question is, well, okay, if you don't believe in that, what do you want to create instead? And like Sinclair was talking about, okay, if we see suffering in the world and we respond to it with more suffering, aren't we just creating more suffering in the world? When, okay, what do we want to see instead of suffering? And this is not to say that, okay, we see some suffering, we just pretend that that's not real and it's not happening. It's very real and it's very much happening. But what do we want to see instead? Do we want to see more joy? Do we want to see more peace? Do we want to see more equality? Well, how can we hold those vibrations in us instead? And what are the expressions of those vibrations out into the world? And the more of that we bring in, then we're seeing suffering and injustice, and we're replacing it with peace and equality and fairness and joy. And when we bring that to the world instead, we actually are creating this shift of balance from there's the suffering, and we're not necessarily alleviating some of the suffering, but we're bringing up more joy and peace and more joy and peace and more joy and peace. And more people in the world that are creating joy and peace and equality and justice, then those things act like a snowball effect. And when you treat someone kind, they're more apt to treat the next person kind. And then they're more apt to treat the next person kind, and so on and so forth. And it just grows exponentially. And this whole like, okay, someone's done something unjust, so now we need to punish them. Now we need to like make them feel ashamed. Doesn't really stop them. It really helps them dig in further. So one of the examples I was thinking about was like, I remember like in the 90s, PETA was going around to all these like...
This is the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals.
Which, great cause, right? Animals should be treated ethically.
Sure.
Okay, so we're all in agreement.
Yeah.
Animals should be treated ethically. So going to someone who's wearing a fur coat and pouring pig's blood on them is not really going to, wow, these PETA people, I think that they really proved a valid point by like staining my fur coat and making me feel horrible. I think I should look at myself. No, it immediately creates, the person who gets the blood thrown on them is like, fuck these PETA people, no matter what they have to say, no matter how valid it is, no matter how right it may be, they've drawn a hard line in the sand where PETA has personally attacked them, and now fuck whatever they're saying, no matter how much they actually really do agree with it. So anytime someone is expressing an injustice and we go to make them feel shame about it, we go to attack them, it does nothing but help them dig into their position even more. And it creates this further division, this further separation into an us and to a them, to a right and to a wrong. And that is what's going on, which is creating all the injustice anyway. So it's feeding in to more of this stuff that we're like, we don't want to see any more of this.
Yeah, the plant medicine really does a good job at interrupting what we believe about ourselves, everything that we have, the story of our personalities, the story of our lives. It comes in and it's like, let's pull this little thread and see what unravels. And it kind of starts to unravel, the way that you think about a lot of things. And something our elder said that really helped me start thinking about, like, disengaging from politics and disengaging from being on a side and starting to find things in common with each other than I felt allowed to. Because when you pick a side, you're not really allowed to fraternize with the other side. You're, it's like, you're not supposed to be friends with people from the other side. It's like, well, you might have some crazy person in your family who's like, oh yeah, the one, my Trump uncle or whatever. But one thing my elder said was the left wing and the right wing belong to the same bird. And I really liked that because it helped me start to look at my own side of the street and my own participation in some really toxic behavior and some like things that removing the politics, like if someone was, they are believing the same things about me that I'm believing about them. It's just not the same like concepts. And that for me was a really big shift. And it was hard to start, like, I never thought I would be a person that could be like, yeah, I do not pay attention to the news. I don't follow any news accounts. I have completely disengaged myself from that. And I started slow. I would do like, okay, I'm going to snooze this. I'm going to snooze NPR for 30 days. I'm going to unfollow Vice. I'm going to it's like I would get triggered by something I would see and then I'd be like, why am I allowing this social media feed to upset me? Why am I allowing someone who on Instagram who has a certain body type and is like showing sexy pictures of themselves? I don't have to follow that. And starting to make those little adjustments in my feed, and then they would come back like 30 days later and then I'd be like, oh my God, this is like hijacking my vibe. And it felt so empowering to be like, nope, not this, not this. You're not invited into my brain. You're not invited into my brain. I don't pay attention to things anymore that trigger me in that way. And there's a part of that is very privileged. There is a part of that you could say, maybe I've just decided to not be connected. Some people might call it spiritual bypassing. I call it radical self-care and radical self-love, because for me, I have a greatly improved mental and emotional and physical landscape when I am not eating garbage on social media.
That's right.
And when something bad happens, I assure you, you will find out about it. Someone will tell you.
That's right.
And then you can go and seek it out if you want to learn more about it.
I noticed that, well, for the most part, right, my days are pretty good. I have some work to do. I exercise when I can. I cook some meals. I water some plants. I feed some animals. I hang out with this person I love. I sing some songs. I'm doing, right, all these things that really are not, there's not a lot of like horrible things going in my life. But when I look at the news, it's like, that is the real terrorist. That is the one that's creating terror in my life. That is telling me about all this injustice and all these horrible things. And when I disconnect from that, then when I go out in the world, maybe I do see an injustice. I'm in a good, healthy place to respond to that with more peace, more compassion. I can help the person who's being treated unfairly. And I'm not overwhelmed by the 70,000 things that are going on in the news world that are awful. I can really respond in real time with what's real and what's real in front of me.
That reminds me of the same elder that used to tell us, we lived in the Andes Mountains in Ecuador, just outside of Cuenca, and worked at a retreat center there. And it was absolutely beautiful. Just like I don't know if you've ever seen the Andes Mountains, but this part, the Ecuadorian, they're green and rolling, and like it's pristine, beautiful land. And he would be in the ceremony and he would say, everyone says the earth is sick. I'm looking around. The earth is not sick. The humans are sick. We have a sickness where we're polluting the environment. We are not taking care of the water. And when we don't take care of the water in our own lives, how dare we walk around acting like other people are polluting the water? If we don't personally take responsibility for how we treat the land in our own lives, if we're throwing wrappers out the window, are we really environmentalists? Like, we have to start taking some real responsibility in our own lives of like, okay, I say that I care about the earth. Am I letting the shower run for 30 minutes before I get in it? Am I wasteful? Am I throwing food away? Am I, there's a million things like that you can start to go over in your own life. And that's not to cause guilt for like, oh, I should be like doing all this stuff. Do what you can with what you have.
That's right. This idea of like, when I started to wake up, I'm like, oh my God, I'm buying so much plastic, and I'm consuming too much water, and I'm like buying stuff that needs to be thrown away, and like, oh, I'm like driving a car, and like, and like the weight of all this started just piling up real quick. And it's like, okay, the way our world is, like, my idea of what living perfectly in harmony is not attainable for me right now. I don't have the resources. I don't have the time. I don't have
the yurt.
Yeah, exactly. I don't have the land to do it yet. So it's like, okay, well, what can I do? And that is enough. We don't need one or two people being perfect in whatever category. We need 100 people doing whatever little bit they can, and it's going to make a big difference. And I was also thinking about, like, okay, we're not talking about if there is real injustice in your life. Okay, so, like, we're talking about all this, like, inequality and stuff like that. Some people are personally experiencing inequality. We're not trying to say that that is not real. We're not trying to say that, like, that doesn't need immediate attention. That does need immediate attention. That's happening in your life, and that's real to you. It's happening outside of the computer screen, outside of the phone, outside of the TV screen. Then address it. Do something about it. It needs to be done. What I'm saying is, in addition to all that, to be fighting the injustice in your own life and carrying the weight of Syria and the Amazon jungle and the pollution in the ocean on top of that is too much. It's too much. Whatever injustice is showing up in our own life is enough for us to deal with. And when we have, when there's a cause that we really can do something about, that we really can help, okay, we're seeing some injustice in this community, and I feel really called to do something about that, and I feel really called to help out there, then go help out. Go make a difference. Go create what we want to see instead. And that is enough. We don't need to put it all on our own backs.
And we don't need to flagellate ourselves for not doing enough either. Like, this COVID crisis has been really heavy on everyone individually. And there are many, many marginalized groups, particularly people of color, who are being affected in more serious and personal ways than a lot of other people. And this, like, the situation that we found ourselves in right now, we're in a crisis. We're in an ongoing worldwide crisis. And there are a lot of good things coming out of this as well. There's a lot of ingenuity coming out, like new businesses are coming. We started our business during this pandemic. We would never have been able to do this in this way had we not gotten stuck in the United States because the borders closed. And, it's like so much of what we have learned this year about resilience and about, making it through, it has been... Community is so important. Community is so important. And when we are in greater numbers, we are much more powerful. We're much more healthy. We're much more like mentally and emotionally whole and nourished when we have other people around us. And getting stuck in this problem and this mindset of like, well, there's this COVID virus and, the president's, like we have this, it's like you can wake up every day and get stuck in a problem and turn yourself into a victim just by the way you talk to yourself every day. And that is, like John said, not to say there are a lot of people who have very serious injustice, suffering, and, like, have it harder than a lot of other people. That doesn't mean that, okay, taking care of yourself doesn't mean that you're not acknowledging that that exists. Taking care of yourself the best way you can and celebrating your own ability to create joy and abundance, whatever that looks like for you, does not mean that you are forgetting about other people's suffering as well, or that you having, money, for example, does not create other people not having money. This, like, it's just this, it's part of the fear vibration, the scarcity part, where there's not enough for everyone. There is more than enough for everyone.
That's right.
And the more people who are doing inner work, who are doing shadow work, who are working with medicine, who are really taking care of their inner landscape, who become people with means, the more people with means who are interested in doing, not just giving to charities or supporting whatever cause. We're talking about fundamentally changing how we live on this planet. We're talking about things like permaculture and creating, cohesive, intentional communities where people are contributing to the health of each other by living together in ways that are symbiotic. And there's so many ways that we could be living on this planet that are different. And these governments and these philanthropists and the people that have all the money now, they are not coming to save us. They are, they are doing everything they can to prop this system up. Like, it's like, okay, we have a boat or like this floor is falling, so let's put some scaffolding under it. And now it's falling over here. The system is falling. And, how we can, I'm not saying like bring about the fall of the system, but it's become very obvious that the way that things are changing is not through these big institutions. The way that things change is through the individual and the community.
That's right. And okay, if you want to make a difference in the inequality going on in the world, treat people equally. That's it. Listen to someone who has experienced injustice. And the news makes us think that we have to have a solution and we have to pretend like we know and we understand, and we don't have to. I am never going to understand what it's like to be Black. I'm never going to understand what it's like to be in any myriad of other groups that have been completely marginalized and experienced so much injustice in this world. But what I can do is treat someone in that group equally. What I can do is listen without trying to pretend like I understand or offer a solution, that I can be there as a real friend, a real companion, and I can ask, well, how can I help? But I don't need to have the solution. I don't need to pretend like I know what it's like to walk a mile in someone else's shoes, but I can offer my real human support, individual support. And that goes a long, long way.
How we heal racism is to unlearn racism ourselves individually. It's not posting on social media. It's having a conversation with your family member about racism. It's having a conversation with yourself about racism. It's looking at your own behavior and saying, how can I do this? How can I be a better human? How can I be a better part of the human family? And that's why we really love getting to work and retreat with people who are ready to talk about this stuff, who are ready to take the ride with the plants and like look at their own participation in a system that's broken and do something about it.
The more people that take personal responsibility for their own little slice of the whole, before you know it, the majority of the whole will be taken care of. We don't need to fix the whole thing from the top down. It's a bottom-up fix. So what we're inviting you to do with this podcast is to turn the mirror, turn the finger from out there, this is going on, this is wrong, this is whatever, and point it toward yourself and ask, what can I do in my own life to make a difference? And then turn off the TV, turn off the social media, turn off the whatever that is trying to tell you that you should feel bad, that you should feel angry all the time, that you should feel a bleak outlook on the world, because that is a choice that we make. And when we start to feel empowered, we start to feel in joy, we start to feel in peace, we start to feel at love with everything that is a part of creation, and we respond and our actions follow suit, then we will be creating more of the world that we want to see.
The best way to be an ally, to be an amplifier, to to make the world that you want is to start with yourself.
That's right.
And to look around your world and start with some gratitude. Like, the world is not a terrible place. The world is a beautiful place. And if you're here listening to this, chances are that you have an idea that the world is pretty beautiful, and maybe you haven't figured out exactly what your part is in that, and that's okay. Like, the reason that we want to share about this stuff is that these little tools of, kind of these little vignettes of looking at, how does this social media make me feel? How does this news make me feel? And why am I continuing to like engage with it if it doesn't feel good? We're giving you permission to stop engaging with it.
That's
and
right.
Sometimes having someone else say, you know what, maybe this isn't healthy, gives us permission to make the change in our own life. And we're certainly not perfect at it. Like, we have to use social media for work, and it's hard. Like, I'll find myself getting, upset about something, and I'm like, oh, I'm doing that thing again where I let the social media upset me. And taking breaks, like, for most of us, we don't want to disconnect from it completely, but take a break, take a week break, take a weekend, take one day, take 30 days, or, maybe some of them, it's like, you know what? I don't really like Facebook. I'm going to stay on this one. Or just any way that we're kind of limiting that rut that we have in our brains to just pick up the phone and like scroll. Any limitation of that is good. And even if it's only just unfollow, block, mute, whatever, people that make you feel shitty. If you find yourself having a twinge of like, you can feel it. It's like here for me in my solar plexus. When I feel that, I'm like, block. I'm like, unfollow. You don't have to participate, and it's okay. Like, you will live the FOMO of whatever is going on. Some bullshit will always be going on in the internet. You can check out of it for years. We went to Ecuador, and we were like, US, I don't know what's going on there. We came back, it was like same shit, different day.
That's right. So I want to leave you guys with something to think about that, well, from my experience, when people are feeling like they have all their needs met, and not their external needs, but their internal needs, they feel like they love themselves, they care about themselves, they respect themselves, then they extend that to everyone else that they meet. That people who are acting in ways that are unjust are treating themselves that same way. So the more that we can treat those people with love and kindness, the more that we can create love through our actions in the world, the more that sinks into the person who is feeling unjust internally. And more love gets in, and the more that gets in there, the more people are going to start to sink into that loving themselves, caring about themselves, having compassion for themselves. And the more people that do that, the more actions of compassion and love and generosity and justice are going to be in the world. And the more that this happens, the more it's going to snowball. And before you know it, the whole world can be vibing on love and compassion and justice. So it starts right here with each of us. And yeah, I think that's it.
We're so grateful that you joined us today. Thank you so much for spending some time discussing releasing the fear vibration with us. If you're interested in staying connected with us, the best way to do that is to join our mailing list. And you could do that by going to our website at mysticalheartcollective.com. We have a really cool free guide that you can get. It's the ultimate guide to healing with psychedelics. It's 22 pages of how to get started with healing with psychedelics. And if you'll just go to our website, click on free guide, you can join our mailing list. And we send out a weekly newsletter where we share this podcast and talk about the subject and give, updates and news. We're about to start opening our retreats. We're starting this summer, and we're going to be opening those soon. We're very, very excited about that. And please follow us on Instagram at Mystical Heart Collective and on Facebook. Same deal. You can listen to this podcast on pretty much everywhere: Spotify, Apple, Anchor. Yeah. And if you have any questions, feel free to message us anytime. We love talking to our peeps, our family.
That's right.
All right, everybody.
Peace.
Have a great one. Bye.